This is a World Boxing News article. The headline reads, Sky Sports box office, pay-per-view buys down as last two Matchroom events flop. And the Matchroom events he's talking about are Dillian Whyte versus Oscar Rivas and Vasyl Lomachenko versus Luke Campbell. The article also mentions Anthony Joshua's fight against Andy Ruiz, the first fight in New York, because that did far less pay-per-view buys than Anthony Joshua fights have done in the past. So let's look at each one of these events and try and see why the numbers are so low compared to some of the pay-per-view events Matchroom have done in the past. Whyte Rivas, it says here, did just under 300,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, Dillian Whyte, if memory serves me correct, his best pay-per-view, other than the Anthony Joshua fight, okay, was when he fought, was it Joseph Parker? Was that his highest grossing pay-per-view? And I think that did maybe 4.5, right? So 450,000 pay-per-view buys, there or thereabouts. So he has done less for the Rivas fight. Now, a lot of that is just down to the fact that the British public don't know who Oscar Rivas is. The British public are far more familiar with Joseph Parker because he just fought Anthony Joshua. And that fight had done 1.5 million pay-per-view buys, there or thereabouts. So coming off the back of that, and the fact that Dillian Whyte had been exciting, you know, he'd knocked out Lucas Brown and all that kind of stuff. There was momentum behind him. So you can understand why he did 400,000 pay-per-view buys for the Joseph Parker fight. But for this Oscar Rivas fight, the guy don't speak English, the British public don't know him, so he was obviously going to do less buys. Just under 300,000 buys for Dillian Whyte is actually not bad, to be honest, considering the, anonymous nature of the opponent in the eyes of the British public. So I wouldn't consider that a flop. I consider it for Dillian Whyte and the numbers that he normally does, it's okay. Lomachenko versus Luke Campbell. Luke Campbell is unknown in the UK to the majority of the public. Most people don't know who Luke Campbell is. So any people overseas in the United States who have this impression that Luke Campbell is some kind of household name in Britain, he's not. Nobody knows Luke Campbell here. Only the hardcore boxing fans know who Luke Campbell is. Yeah, and maybe people from his particular, part of the UK up there in Hull in Yorkshire. But the majority of the public, they've got no idea who Luke Campbell is. Luke Campbell could walk down most streets in the UK and nobody would recognize him. And then you've got Vasyl Lomachenko, who again, outside of the hardcore boxing community, nobody in the UK knows who Lomachenko is. Yeah, the hardcore boxing community showed up in the arena, paid their money, turned up to the press events to watch Lomachenko. But in terms of pay-per-view, the wider public, people don't know who Lomachenko is in the UK. So again, Lomachenko versus Campbell did, they're saying how many pay-per-view buys? Just under 200,000. Just over 200,000 pay-per-view buys. Again, two people who the British public at large don't really know. Not surprising that it didn't do great pay-per-view numbers. Okay? Then we move on to the Anthony Joshua-Andy Ruiz fight. Well, with Anthony Joshua-Andy Ruiz, it's a bit different, okay? Because, with Whyte Rivas and Lomachenko-Campbell, it's not that surprising that they didn't do crazy numbers, okay? Given the fighters involved. If any of you overseas have this misconception that you can just put any fight on in the UK and do great pay-per-view numbers, well, I don't know what type of crack you're smoking. It's never been like that in the UK. There's never been a time in the UK where you can just put any fight on and get crazy pay-per-view numbers. This seems to be this bizarre notion that some PBC drones and fanboys and cult members have about the UK, that you can just put anything on for the UK fans and they'll all turn up in droves to watch it. Absolute nonsense. There's only certain fighters who have ever been big pay-per-view draws in the United Kingdom. Only a few. A very, very small, select few. But with Anthony Joshua, who is the biggest pay-per-view star the UK's ever seen as far as heavyweights, he was doing very well. Of course, early on in his career, he did his first pay-per-view against Dillian Whyte, and all of his fights after that, I think, were pay-per-view, weren't they? it reached a crescendo around the Klitschko fight and the Joseph Parker fight. That's where the pay-per-view numbers peaked. But here's the thing. I think Anthony Joshua's popularity in the UK started to decline around the Klitschko and Joseph Parker fights for one main reason, and that's because he started to show vulnerability. You see, this generation of British boxing fans and this generation of British people in general is different than previous generations. This generation expects results. This generation expects winners. You see, in the past, in the 80s and the 70s, you had all these British fighters who would never get medals, gold medals at the Olympics. It was very rare. Who would seldom become world champions, particularly at heavyweight. I mean, Britain went without a world heavyweight champion for something like 100 years. Okay? So the fans basically didn't have very high standards when it came to what they expected from their heavyweights. If their heavyweight, like Frank Bruno, just went in there and gave it a good go, or Henry Cooper just gave it a good go, even if they didn't win, they'd still be loved and adored by the British public. But since that time, we ended up having Lennox Lewis, who was obviously one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time. Bruno did hold a world title eventually. Herbie Hyde came along. He had a title for a little bit. Even Michael Bent, who was born in Britain, ended up holding a version of the world title. And Lennox Lewis obviously was the last undisputed champion. So with knowledge of that and knowledge of world champions in other divisions who come from the United Kingdom, the newer generation expected more success from their heavyweights and from their boxers in general. The newer generation was raised on Floyd Mayweather, who kind of redefined what it is to be successful in boxing. This emphasis on keeping your O and looking invincible and making every fight look like a mismatch. This became the fashionable thing. And in order for the young generation of fans to take to you and believe in you, you had to be dominating in that kind of fashion. When Anthony Joshua was on his rise to the top, that's what was happening. He was just blowing people out. Other than the Dillian Whyte fight, he was dominating everybody. But then he got into the Klitschko fight and the Parker fight after that, and all of the nation's eyes in the UK were watching Anthony Joshua, expecting him, hoping him to go in there and destroy both those guys. It didn't happen. He did beat Klitschko. It was a dramatic fight. But even from then, there were people who started to doubt Anthony Joshua. And look, the majority of Anthony Joshua fans are not hardcore boxing fans. When you have an athlete who's as famous as that in their particular country, the majority of fans are going to be casuals. And the casuals don't understand boxing. Yeah? They just want results and success. This generation in general, this new generation, not just in the UK, but even in the United States and everywhere, this new generation are not interested in sob stories as much as, they don't have as much time for sob stories and hard luck stories. They want results. They want to see winners. That's what they respect, winners. In my generation and generations before, people had it hard. People didn't have the disposable income for gadgets and gizmos and nice clothes and, nice sneakers and all this kind of stuff, going out to fancy restaurants. In my generation and previous generations, most people didn't have that growing up in the inner city. Most people were genuinely dirt poor. So when rappers and musicians and all these other kind of people would sing and rap about hardship, people could relate to it. It wasn't frowned on and looked down upon to present yourself as somebody who is going through hardship. Okay? Somebody who has lost in life and stuff like that. Whereas today's generation is different. Today's generation, it's all about being a winner. Being broke, there's no excuse for that in the eyes of today's generation. Losing in life, there's no excuse for that in the eyes of today's generation. And that same expectation is put upon boxers. So this generation of British boxing fans, the casuals, they're not the same as the people who used to support Bruno back in the days. This is a totally different mindset. And I think when they saw weakness in AJ, in the Klitschko fight, the Parker fight, and then the Takam fight, I think a lot of them started to lose faith in him. And you heard some boos after the Takam fight, if you remember. Then he went on to fight Alexander Povetkin. He showed vulnerability in the Povetkin fight too. So I think that the faith that a lot of British fans were having in AJ was starting to get a bit shaky. And then, of course, there was the Andy Ruiz fight. Now, the Ruiz fight was on at 4 a.m. in the UK. Now, I don't care how big a star you are. If you're putting on a pay-per-view at 4 a.m., you're not going to sell as much as you would if the pay-per-view was on at 10 p.m. Even if you're Canelo Alvarez. If people have to stay up to 4 or 5 a.m. to watch you, you're not going to do the same numbers as you normally would do. Okay, so that takes into account, to some degree, why the pay-per-view numbers were relatively low for AJ for the Ruiz fight. Also the fact that it was a late notice opponent who the British public did not know. No idea who the guy is. Furthermore, he's a fat guy. So again, the casuals are looking at AJ, this sculpted, giant of a man, and they're looking at his opponent who's some fat, chubby, Mexican guy with a smiley face, and they're thinking this is a joke of a fight. Not only are we not staying up to 4 a.m. to watch this, we're certainly not going to pay for it. Yeah? This late notice fat guy opponent we've never heard of before, AJ's going to blow this guy out in a round. This is how the majority of the British public were thinking, because they didn't know any better. Yeah, of course, there was hardcore fans like me and others who knew that Andy Ruiz was very dangerous. But the majority of the British public are not hardcore fans. So, not surprising that they didn't tune in their millions to watch AJ Ruiz 1. Not surprising. Sky knew, before the fight that the pay-per-view numbers would be down. Eddie Hearn knew that. Everybody knew that. Any knowledgeable British boxing fan knew that the pay-per-view numbers for AJ Ruiz would be significantly less than AJ normally does. Yeah? The pay-per-view numbers for AJ Ruiz 2 are going to be significantly higher than they were for the first fight. Yes, it's abroad. It's in Saudi Arabia, not in the UK. But there's only a 2 or 3 hour time difference between Saudi and the UK, depending on where you are in Saudi. So the fight is going to be on at a normal time for the British public. It's going to be on around, I think, the main event will be on around 10 p.m. UK time. So it will just be like having a pay-per-view in the UK. So you can expect that fight to do significantly more buys than the first fight. I still don't think it's going to do the kind of buys that AJ versus Klitschko did or AJ versus Parker did, because I think, as I've previously mentioned, AJ's aura, with the British public has gone now, or it's been severely diminished. This new generation, they want success. They want winners. They don't want people who look vulnerable. They want somebody who looks perfect. And that's what a lot of them believed they had in Anthony Joshua for a time. But now that their image of him or their perception of him has been radically changed, a lot of them are kind of filtering away. So I've said this in videos before, many, many times. I don't think Anthony Joshua is ever going to be the pay-per-view star that he was earlier on in his career. I think that time is done. And I know there's been a lot of people disagreeing with me, saying, oh, you underestimate the British public, Hatman. Well, we'll wait and see. Yeah? If I have underestimated the British public, I'm happy to come out and admit it in the future if AJ starts doing, crazy numbers again. But unless he's fighting Fury or Wilder, I don't think we're going to see AJ get anywhere near 1.5 million pay-per-view buys. I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see AJ filling out stadiums anymore for routine defenses. I don't think so. I don't think AJ can do 80, 90,000 against, a regular mandatory challenger or a regular voluntary challenger. No, I think he's going to have to fight the Wilders or the Furies to be able to fill out Wembley and the Principality and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think that, as I say, the days, those AJ golden years have passed. That's what I think. And there's a knock-on effect, of course, to the AJ golden years passing and AJ not fighting in the UK. There's a knock-on effect to that because when AJ started becoming successful in the UK, a lot of other fighters were able to take advantage of AJ's platform and get a name for themselves. Yeah? And I'm not even just talking about other heavyweights. I mean, even other fighters on Matchroom shows, you know, the Lawrence Okollies of the world and, you know, the Kell Brooks of the world and all those kind of guys, they all benefited when AJ was at the top, when he was doing these crazy pay-per-view numbers. They all benefited from that. Dylan White benefited from it massively from AJ's success. But since AJ hasn't fought in the UK for a long time, it is negatively impacting British boxing. The buzz has dissipated to a large extent in the UK. There's no question about it. And of course, it's not just AJ who's gone over to apply his trade in America and elsewhere overseas. It's also Tyson Fury and various other British fighters. And this has, again, had a knock-on effect for British boxing in general. So, you know, you have to factor that in when it comes to pay-per-view numbers. There are all kinds of different reasons for this. This is why I've been saying that Frank Warren and Tyson Fury have really missed the trick in not having Tyson Fury fight in the UK, because there's a big opportunity now for Tyson Fury to inherit a lot of AJ's fans, people who have lost faith in AJ. Fury had an opportunity there, fight in the UK, bring AJ's fan, you know, some of AJ's former fans in and get them to believe in Fury instead and start having Fury filling out stadiums and arenas and all that kind of stuff, or at least try to. But that opportunity was missed. I mean, they were looking to bring Fury in maybe to fight in the UK in December, but because of the cut that he suffered against Wallin, you know, that's obviously not going to happen. And funny enough, speaking about Frank Warren, Warren apparently has been one of the people circulating this particular story online about the Matchroom pay-per-view events flopping. I mean, that's ironic because Frank Warren's pay-per-views have all been flops. I mean, Frank Warren, he put on, well, he didn't really put it on himself, but he is Tyson Fury's promoter, and Tyson Fury obviously had a pay-per-view against Deontay Wilder, and then two pay-per-views, one against Tom Schwartz and the other against Otto Wallin. According to reports, the Fury-Wilder BT Sport pay-per-view in the UK did less than 100,000 buys. So if Wilder Fury did less than 100,000 buys in the UK, how many buys do you think Fury versus Schwartz or Fury versus Wallin did in the UK? I mean, they probably struggled to even do 40 or 50,000. But yet Frank Warren is coming out and circulating information about Eddie Hearn's pay-per-views flopping. I think Frank Warren needs to worry about his own pay-per-views because they're flopping far worse than Matchroom's pay-per-views are flopping. Let's be real about it. But, you know, Frank Warren, I guess, is hoping that people won't ask too many questions. You know, he's hoping that naive or ignorant individuals will latch on to stories like this and just assume that Frank Warren must be doing better when actually he's doing far worse. So, yeah, moral of the story is every pay-per-view in the UK is not going to do crazy numbers. I don't know who told you that or where you heard that from. It's never been the case in the UK that you can just put a pay-per-view on and do crazy numbers. Never been like that. But there was a golden age, if you want to describe it as such, when AJ had the British public behind him because they felt like he was this invincible force. Because this generation of boxing fans, they want someone invincible. They want someone who is a pure winner. They don't want someone who looks vulnerable. They don't want that. Now, I know that, you know, some people might have sympathy with that, but in general, this new generation have got higher standards for their boxers than previous generations. you know, and they demand dominance. They demand somebody who's going to go out there and look spectacular every time. Yeah, not someone who's going to look like he's on shaky legs and scraping through fights and taking more punches than he should be taking. That's not what they want. They want someone who's like a British Mayweather, not necessarily in style, but in terms of his dominance. That's what this new generation are looking for. And if they don't have that in Anthony Joshua, they're going to look elsewhere. They're going to look to somebody else. You know, that's my take on it. Can the pay-per-view numbers in British boxing be restored to what they once were a couple years ago? Maybe for a one-off fight, maybe for like AJ Fury, or if AJ fought Deontay Wilder, particularly if it was in the UK, maybe. And that's assuming AJ can get past Ruiz. He might not beat Ruiz in the rematch, in which case I don't see anybody attaining those kind of pay-per-view numbers again, you know, 1.5 million buys anytime soon. You know, I don't see it. So, yeah, that's the situation. I think that inevitably we're going to see pay-per-view. Another reason, in fact, I should talk about is the oversaturation of pay-per-view events in the UK. Because not only do you have Sky putting all these pay-per-view events on, you've also got BT constantly putting pay-per-view shows on all the time. You know, the 2 Tyson Fury shows, which were not pay-per-view worthy, they got put on pay-per-view. So there is kind of pay-per-view fatigue with the British public when it comes to boxing. Like, come on, does everything have to be pay-per-view? This is how people feel. And that's having a negative effect as well on pay-per-view sales. When pay-per-views were just coming along once in a while, it was more palatable and acceptable to the British public. Because, you know, when AJ was doing all those big pay-per-views, there wasn't really many other fighters in the UK doing pay-per-views at the time. So AJ was getting the majority of the pay-per-view attention, you know? It's only later on that Dillian Whyte finally started to do his own pay-per-views. Yeah, Dillian Whyte had to fight a lot of guys before he ended up finally getting his own pay-per-view. Yeah. But now it's like they're trying to saturate the market with pay-per-view. AJ ain't fought in the UK for a long time, and a lot of British fans have lost faith in him. And it is what it is. The numbers don't lie at the end of the day. Anybody who's saying that pay-per-view figures are not down in the UK, they're lying to you. The pay-per-view figures are down, but again, if AJ ain't fighting in the UK, well, you can expect them to be down. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel. It's happening. I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.